The people they let in this part of Sydney. These people are all welcome.
Not this one. Oh, you know, Lindran, the criminal and me.
Yeah, I do. And a lot of your family.
Yes.
No, it's good. Good to have you guys.
It's nice.
Celebrate 1, 2, 5 years.
Isn't that amazing? I didn't realize the record was around for that long.
Yeah, it's nearly as old as me.
Yeah, all right, you're all right.
Well, thank you for being here and giving us the good oil and the music.
Amen, Pastor.
Be good. So you're a Solomon Islander.
Yes.
We're all
The
Fijians.
rest are Fiji.
And my wife Solomon Island.
Yeah, I know that. That's all right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's a TPUN.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing is though, the only Melanesians that don't talk pidgin
Are Fijians.
are
Fiji, yes.
right.
That's true.
Yeah, because Islama I can understand and talk. Solomon's the same thing as you.
Yes.
And I go to Fiji and go, wow, that language is a little bit different.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah.
But I think we border Polynesia as well. So
Even New Caledonia, some of
and
the
Caledonia
Melanesians.
doesn't speak pidgin.
Not all of
Actually,
them.
never heard.
Not all of them, but some do.
What sort of pigeon do they have?
Well, it has a bit more French in it.
Wow. There you go.
So, the Fijian. Why?
Oh, I think they want to be Polynesian.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, true.
I don't know. They must have been the Tongans.
Yeah, influence.
Influence of the Tongans, yeah.
Who knows?
What a very big mix in the Pacific, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
It's amazing.
It's good. It's really.
Australia. How many nationalities in Australia? It's a real melting pot, mixing pot, isn't it? Huge. It's just incredible.
Excuse me.
It is a lot. That is for sure. Well, I wish you well as you sing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll enjoy it.
Praise the Lord together.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Pastor.
Yeah. Sing a couple of them.
Sing it
Oh, many things.
That's only Fijian I can. No, it's a bit more. When I was in Fiji, I did understand a bit more. Speak a little bit more, but like I grew up in Papua New Guinea, that's why I talk Fijian. It's just fun to just remember it from when it's easy. Mangas blessing. Well, I should be able to practice Fiji because we have Tarika Loa is my sister, and Mike Sakuri is there sometimes.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
It's not the same.
Town name?
Captain did here. Second grade language.
Other boy. Oh, you here? I do think so.
The usual.
Is he so Pastor Tannen is the TPUM president? Oh, was. President president of the SPD. Who's the president of the TPUM? Oh, okay. You'll know that it cannot be found. That it can't be found or cannot be found. Nice.
I like Adventist Record.
I like Adventist Records.
Adventist Record is very important in the Pacific.
I like Adventist Record.
I like Adventist Record.
I enjoy reading the Adventist Record.
I love Record magazine.
I think Adventist Record is important in the Pacific.
Because of its educational content and inspiring stories.
Because it consistently provides me with spiritual nourishment. Its articles and content offer valuable insights and guidance for deepening my faith, making it a very reliable source of inspiration.
Because of its informative content, and further because the Adventist Record has a lot of topics, and they're topics that's actually trending in the Pacific today.
It serves as a primary means of communication within the Seventh-day Adventist community in the South Pacific, where it disseminates information about church activities, events, news that target church members, pastors, and leaders within our region. And this is very essential, very important for keeping our community, Seventh-day Adventist community, connected and informed.
Because of community connections. It features news, events, and updates related to our church and its members, making me feel more engaged and informed.
One, it has news from around the world church or here in the Pacific, and it's good to know that we as Adventists are connected through our stories and experiences. I enjoy the spiritual lessons that are shared in the article. It helps me to strengthen my faith and also encouragement. And I would think lastly, I enjoy reading the testimonies that are shared by members, as it is it helps us strengthen our journey as well, reading these testimonies.
Because I'm able to hear news from around the Pacific region and know how the Lord is working in the lives of our people around the various countries in the South Pacific Division.
It provides health tips for people who are looking for a better lifestyle.
Because it highlights the stories of how the church is growing in the South Pacific Division.
I love Record magazine. It's become my go-to source for everything happening in the global Seventh-day Adventist Church community. It's like a window to the global SDA Church right in my hands.
This is working.
Am I on? I'm on. Are you on?
Am I on? No.
I think you may have just turned yourself off. Don't touch it.
I think I'm here.
Okay, there we go.
Hooray.
All right.
Awesome. That's
true.
okay. Thank you everyone for coming back. I know the natural instinct after church and lunch is to sleep, so we really appreciate you all being here with us for the afternoon program.
Did you all have a good lunch? Have you had enough to eat? Yes. The fact that that was a sort of a comatose yes tells me all that I need to know. Did you have some good desserts, Anita?
Yeah, I had the cake pudding thing.
It was a cake pudding thing, yeah.
I'm not sure what that was, but it was good. Yeah. Cool.
Fantastic.
I mentioned earlier in the program that Adventist Record is one of the oldest publications in Australia. It's not actually the longest running. There was another one called The Bulletin, which was 128 years old, but it ceased in 2008.
So we're overtaking
So we have
the
3
bulletin.
years to go. Women's Weekly has actually been running a long time, and so has another school magazine, but none of them, except for Signs of the Times.
Yeah, well,
Signs of the Times is
Signs of the Times is pretty
a little
great
bit
as
older.
well, let's be honest.
But 125 years, as I was looking through the Wikipedia of other magazines in Australia, I was like, wow, it's actually amazing. So
125 years is a pretty insane milestone to be
Yeah.
able to celebrate.
anyway, we won't go there again because we already introduced that all in the earlier session, which I'm sure you're all at. So we're just going to let the rest of the thing run its course.
What have we? Oh goodness, sorry about that. What have we got in store for this afternoon, Zanita? What can we be looking forward to?
We have a few presenters talking about more on the history. I don't really know.
We'll find out
We'll
with you
find out,
potentially. No, we have some really great keynotes though from Dr. Barry Oliver, from Bruce Manners, and a special panel discussion that we're also going to be looking forward to. So that's really cool. There's going to be some other stuff as well. We're not going to give everything away.
No.
You can read it in your bulletin program anyway, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But for now, we're going to hand it over to Pastor Glenn Townend, our division president. So thank you, Pastor Glenn.
Thanks, Jesse, and thanks, Scott, for your very creative way of picking division presidents. I'll have to share it with the General Conference and see whether they go for it. Who knows? The record. Congratulations to the record, but particularly to all of the people that have been a part of that for the last 125 years. It's a big history, as Anita's been saying, and that the record tells our story. It always has told our story. And that story is a story worth knowing. And the fact that you can see that the record is expanding. Now, I won't tell you that I went to one of the missions in the Trans-Pacific Union who just gave a wonderful endorsement of the record and found boxes that high of records not distributed. But I can tell you that in that same place, the people at an event that I was, people come up and talk to me, and this is all over the division. And at every event, pretty much, people will come up and say, hey, thank you for what you're writing in the record. It's really helpful and interesting. And that's their kind of way to, I guess, connect with me. But it tells me that people all over our division, that never used to happen in American Samoa, but it is now. It never happened before in Vanuatu, but it is now. And the same in Papua New Guinea. And I suspect that I think the record will have to morph and continue to change. And I've got some ideas on how that can happen, because we are becoming a much bigger church. And when you think about it, over 600,000 members. Officially, Papua New Guinea has 400,000 of those. And then the Trans-Pacific, another 120. Where are the most of our members? And so, yeah, and the fact that they particularly engage with the digital format. And thank you that we've moved in that direction recently in telling our story. The things that it tells well are the stories of the different ministries that are happening around the place and the events that celebrate different ministries. The other stories that it tells are the stories of the issues that we wrestle with. Issues of society, issues of faith, and how we connect. And the record does well in telling those stories. But ultimately, it tells the story of how we journey with God together and keep ahead of us the blessed hope of the soon return of Jesus. You know, in the book of Habakkuk, when Habakkuk complains and whinges about not understanding what God is doing, he finally gets a vision. And the vision is the just will live by faith. And that's really our message. It's the only message that's ever changed the world. It's the only message that will ever change the world. And Habakkuk says it's got an appointed time. Jesus is coming back. We are the last custodians of that message. But it's interesting that as he shares about it, the first thing he says, write it down and then distribute it so that the people can read and understand the vision. That's what the record is about. God's story, making people who are unjust, unholy, by faith, holy and righteous. And so we're going to pray now for the record and rededicate it to that vision, that it is writing down God's story in our lives of the vision that He has for us. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, the first thing that we want to do is just say thank you that you have given us a vision, that our pioneers wanted to take the everlasting gospel to the ends of the earth. We still have that vision here in the South Pacific, and we thank you that it's expanding and growing. And as you said to Habakkuk, we need to write it down so people hear it, read it, and can understand it. And we will continue to do that because we want, as we journey, to keep sharing our story that will encourage all of us. Those who are villagers in the Solomon Islands, those who live in high-rises in Melbourne, and everything between. Thank you for the Records ministry and the people that have made it happen. And as we move forward, we want to continue to keep telling your story in our midst that will inspire and encourage the last day disciple-making movement. And we don't want another 125 years, please. Come soon, Lord Jesus. That's the vision we long for. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Happy Sabbath, church. As Pastor Tannant was telling us, the record shares the stories of how God has moved in people's lives. And as we share a story through song, the simple message of this special item is that Jesus has been our hope over the past 125 years, and he still remains our hope in the years to come, especially as we work to complete his mission in these last days.
I've been blessed with many things. God's been good to me. I have family and friends who share in all I do. But if I lose it all and I'm left with nothing, if I have the Lord, I know I'll make it through. He's the only reason I live, but oh, what a reason. He's the only reason I live, but oh, what a reason. You see, there's nothing in this world worth living for. It only leaves you empty and longing for more. He's the only reason I live, but oh, what a reason. You may have tried a lot of things to find real happiness, but if you look very, very long, you just cannot be found. No, no. But when you find the Lord and the power of His Spirit, His sweet Holy Spirit, He'll be your reason to live, and He'll never, never let you down. No, He's the only reason I live, but oh, what a reason. He's the only reason I live, but oh, what a reason. You see, there's nothing in this world worth living for. It only leaves you empty and longing for more. Oh, He's the only reason I live, but oh, what a reason. You'll see there's nothing in this world that's worth living for. It only leaves you empty and longing for more. Oh, He's the only reason I live. Oh, He's the only reason I live. Oh, He's the only reason I live. But oh, what a
Hello? Hello? Yes? No? All right. Thank you very much for your ministry. That was beautiful. We're about to get our first keynote address for this afternoon from Dr. Barry Oliver. He is our former South Pacific Division president. He has also been a church pastor, a college teacher, an administrator, an evangelist, and I've been told that in his retirement he's still working hard as a conjoint, not a conjoined, a conjoint associate professor at Avondale University. He has authored more than, get this, 106 significant publications and 192 magazine articles. I'm sure that number's probably a little bit higher now. So would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Barry Oliver.
It works. This afternoon I would like to talk about the beginnings of our church in Australia and the South Pacific and demonstrate that the church began here on a tremendous wave of mission. And in the midst of this mission was born what we now know as the Adventist Record. I'd like to refer you to a very important publication that has appeared online fairly recently. And just about everything we say here this afternoon, you can read about it. You can read an article about it in the Adventist Encyclopedia online. It is continually being updated. Facts and figures are continually being added. If you don't know about it, you should. Because everything Adventist is contained therein. The people, the events, the places, the doctrines, everything Adventist. And I commend it to you. We're going to talk about the Record as a journal of the South Pacific Division. Remember that, and Pastor Townend, thank you so much for that emphasis. Because that is a fairly recent change that has been taking place in our thinking as a church in this part of the world. We are not just Australia, we are not just New Zealand, we are the South Pacific. And that magnificent item that we just enjoyed together demonstrates what is happening around our church as the music and the people and the vibrancy of this church in the South Pacific is gaining momentum. And our journal, our magazine, The Record, must reflect that momentum that is taking place in our church. We are a diverse church. As I looked around this church this morning, I saw people from everywhere gathered here to worship together as one. That's what our church is like in the Greater Sydney Conference. That's what our church is like in the Australian Union. That's what our church is like in the South Pacific Division. And it is important as we go forward that our publishing work reflect that reality as we are a very diverse church. We are part of a worldwide community that has been called by God at the end of time for the purpose of living and proclaiming the everlasting gospel in its fullness to all the world, inviting those who hear to accept Jesus and become a part of the community which knows, experiences and shares its hope in Jesus Christ and his return. Why was the decision made to come to the South Pacific and specifically Australia? Stephen Haskell, the president of the California Conference in the early 1880s, began sending literature along with a number of his church members to Australia. They got addresses of various people, especially in the city of Melbourne. And they were hoping that this would engender some response. It didn't engender much response at all, because Melbourne is a whole lot of miles away from Los Angeles and San Francisco. So in 1884, the California Conference called for funds so that they could think about sending some missionaries to this part of the world. There's a story about a teenager by the name of Henrietta Johnson who sold her jewellery so that she could make a donation toward the sending of missionaries to the South Pacific. Significantly, she later married Robert Hare. Anyone heard of Robert Hare? If you haven't heard of him, it's because he's a New Zealander. Actually, Robert Hare became one of our earliest pastors and a very significant person in the history of our church in the South Pacific, and in New Zealand in particular. Who were the first pioneers and what were their respective roles? Well, there were 11 people who came on that first missionary journey, significantly on a ship named the SS Australia. They left San Francisco. First, there was Stephen Nelson Haskell. He had been the president of the California Conference. He was the leader and evangelist. He came again a few years later, because he only stayed a very short time. He'd married Mary Howe, who was 21 years older than him. He married her when he was 17. And Mary passed away, and then he married here, Hetty Hurd, in February 1897. He married her in 1897, that's right, I've got the dates right. And then he returned back to America in 1899. Did you know that he actually had proposed to Ellen White? But Ellen White said, no, that's not to be. So she invited him to have a look at this young lady, Hetty Hurd, who was working overseas at the time. She brought her out to Australia. She met him at the ship and married him later that day. How's that for a quick marriage? Anyway, that's extra information. John Orr Corliss, his wife Julia, and their daughter Lulu and son Burr. How would you like a name, Burr? He was an evangelist. He was here from 1885 to 1887, and then he came again between 1893 and 1896. Also in the group was Menda Crocker Israel, his wife Lizzie, and their daughters Jessie and May. He was also an evangelist and administrator. They stayed for 12 years because they first came in 1885, and then he returned to California. Henry Scott, a printer, was another of the first group. He remained for 7 years and returned to work in Pacific Press in 1892. Then there was a coal porter by the name of William Arnold. He stayed for only 3 years and then returned to England and the Caribbean. Significantly, also in those early years, Arthur Daniels was here in the South Pacific, particularly in New Zealand and Australia, and also Ellen White herself lived in Australia between 1892 and 1900. This is a picture of Stephen Haskell, about the time he would have been here in Australia. This was a picture of John Corliss, about the time he was here. This was Israel, what did I say his name was? That's testing you out, I can't even remember myself. Mendel Israel, that's got it, together with his wife and children. Now this is the printer, Henry Scott. It's very significant that they sent a printer in that first group. And it's also significant that they sent a literature evangelist. I'll come back to that in a little while when I am looking at the mission strategy. The mission strategy of those early years had 4 emphases: publishing, camp meetings and public evangelism, education, and health and healing. Let me look at them one by one, but in reverse order. You can see here half of the list of the hospitals and sanitariums that were established in those first years of the work in the South Pacific. Now, if you think that's quite a list for a very, very small group of people, that's not all. Here's the rest of the list. They had a tremendous missionary zeal, and health was a significant pillar in that missionary zeal. Notice there significant places that still exist, such as 1903, Sydney Sanitarium. Then down in the bottom there, Sanitarium Health Food Company was organised in 1898. Health was part of the strategy of mission in those early days. Education. In August 1892, the Australasian Bible School, our first school, was established in St Kilda, Melbourne. And then 1897, the Avondale School for Christian Workers, which of course now is Avondale University. So you've got health, you've got education, then you have camp meetings and public evangelism. Very early we started conducting camp meetings. Our first one was in New Zealand in 1893. The first in Australia was in January 1894 in Brighton, New Brighton in Melbourne. People came from everywhere for these camp meetings. It was a very key part of the evangelistic strategy. Ellen White was in Australia during those years, and she, of course, was a key speaker at many of those early camp meetings. There's a picture. You probably can't see the faces of the people there too well, but you can see the significant number of people at the first camp meeting held in New Brighton in Melbourne. This is another camp meeting held shortly after in Geelong, also in Victoria. Public evangelism. The first church was established in Melbourne just 6 months after they arrived. In January 1886, remembering they arrived in Melbourne in June 1885, and the first baptisms had been held just the week before the first church was established. William Wayneman was the first baptismal candidate for the new church. And if you go up to Cooranbong today, you can drive around the new estate, and the main road as you go in is called Wayneman Drive, after guess who? There are evangelistic meetings very early in Adelaide, Hobart, Sydney, Rockhampton and Perth in Australia. And very shortly thereafter, there were quite a number of programs being held, particularly by Mendel Israel over in New Zealand. By 1901, there were 2,383 church members in Australia. That compared with only 1,090 in California. In other words, this mission emphasis was so strong in this South Pacific region that we very quickly outstripped the membership of the mother church, or the mother conference, if you like. But the one I particularly want to emphasise is publishing. Because publishing, there is no doubt, was what held everything else together. It was like the glue that held the whole of the new church enterprise together. By January 1886, again, 6 months after we first arrived, we were publishing the first journal, Bible, Echo and Signs of the Times, which we now call Signs of the Times. Now, Jared, that must be just about the oldest journal in Australia, religious journal. If it started in 1886 and the Bulletin finished 3 years ago, having only, 128, this Signs of the Times has got to be the oldest in Australia. We can confirm that later, but I'm just working off the top of my head later. There were 8,000 issues of that first journal, Signs of the Times, and was published very shortly after its inauguration in our own Echo Publishing Company in North Fitzroy. That was established in 1889. We're just 4 years after things started off. And that's a picture of the Echo Publishing House in North Fitzroy. Cameras weren't then what they are now. And that's the group of workers at the Echo Publishing House about 1901. So that is the time when the record was now being published at this institution. We had a number of other journals and tracts. You may not realise that the record wasn't the only publication in terms of magazine and tracts. There was a short-lived publication called the Southern Sentinel, which dealt with religious liberty. Again, there was a fairly short-lived one called the Herald of Health. Then there was the Gleaner. The Gleaner lasted in its published form for about a year and a half. It was the magazine designed to tell missionary stories. And then finally, the Australasian Record began in January 1898, and it subsumed the Work of the Gleaner into its own publication. There were a number of others also that came and went over the years, but amazingly it was the Record which continued. The Record has continued, and it was very much part of the missionary strategy and continues to be a very big part of the missionary strategy of the church. And do you notice that those 4 pillars, health, education, camp meetings, yes, and public evangelism and publishing are very, very important in the strategy of our church even to this day. Tract societies were established in almost every conference, every union, every area of our work. They were responsible for the production and distribution of journals, magazines and literature. They oversaw the work of the colporteurs. By 1900 there were 45 colporteurs in Australia working throughout the various conferences. Here you see a picture of the first building of the Signs Publishing Company. Where are you, Andrew? There you are over there. This was the publishing company that was established and took the place of the Echo Publishing Company. 1906, was it, Andrew? Yeah, 1906, the Signs began its work and continues to this day to print literature for the South Pacific Division and to do a fantastic job. Now, of course, it's part of what is known as Adventist Media, and this is a picture of the building across the road, which now sees all of our publishing work, the Record, Signs of the Times, our digital media being produced right here at our Adventist Media headquarters. Mission has been the reason that all of this has happened. Mission was the reason for the zeal of the California Conference, those 11 people who first came, the others who went out to the islands of the Pacific, to New Zealand. And mission continues to be the reason why we do what we do. The existence of the Record for 125 years demonstrates the importance of good communication in the context of the mission of the church. The strategic focus put in place in the early years continues to serve the church well. And while ever the Record directs attention to the primary mission of the church and its members, it will have a place in the life of the church in the South Pacific. God bless the mission of the Record and all of you who play a significant part in its continued publication.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Southern.
Hi, I'm Adrian Lawrence.
My name is Bai Cirillo.
Hi, my name's Helen Sandback. I've pretty much been in this building since I was very, very little, and this was where I did work experience and my first job when I was 15.
I am the print machinist here at Signs Publishing Company, and I've been printing a Record for roughly 4.5 years.
Worked in the Signs here for the last 43 years.
I'm the production supervisor here at Signs. I've worked here for 37 years, so I've seen a lot go through in terms of Record and a lot of changes that have happened over all those years.
I worked at Signs Publishing Company for 50 years and 8 months. At the end of that time, I was the production manager here and had been for a considerable number of years. When I was 18, the Vietnam War was on and Australia had conscription at that stage, so every young man at 18 had to send in his application to the government that you could be called up to be in the army. And I did not want to carry a gun and I didn't want to go and train for the army in any way at all, so I was quite worried about it. So I prayed about it quite earnestly, and then I still worried some more, and then the next time I prayed about it I said to God, well, I'll make you a promise, God. If my number doesn't come up, then I promise you that I'll stay working at the Signs for the rest of my life. My number did not come up, so then I thought, well, I've got to honour that promise because I've promised God. So I thought, well, I'll stay working here for the rest of my life. after a few years I thought, oh, maybe I really should move from here. And then I thought, well, no, I can't, because I made a promise. But then the Lord looked after me, because after a considerable time I was made the boundary foreman. Then I was made the assistant production manager, which was more of a challenge. Then the production manager's role came up, and so I applied for that, and that was a really big challenge, and I got that job as well. So it's been a very interesting 50 years. I promised God, I kept my part of the bargain, and as far as I can see, he kept his. So that's why I've been here for 50 years and 8 months. "50 years ago, everything was done by hand. Everything was a manual process, mainly. I think to go back to the original would be scary stuff.
We started when it was just 2 colours, black and white. And, in a gloss paper, it was okay. But then the change comes to having 4 colours, and it brightens up everything.
I do enjoy being part of spreading the message, if you like, to like-minded people. That is the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
I think record's very important. It keeps the church connected.
I look forward to printing the record every week, so I can see all the news from around the Pacific and Australia and New Zealand. Some familiar faces, some older faces, and it keeps me in touch with what's going on in the church.
It is nice to know that it does go to all those people in all those countries, and a lot of church members do get to read record every week, which is important for all the church news.
It's really the best way of communicating to everybody. It can be digital, it can be a magazine in your hand, which is very important to some people, and the digital's important. It's a matter of it all working together and all happening. The church, I think, would be a bit lost without it. Yeah, it's quite exciting. It's nice to know that it's reaching those people. And it gives you a real incentive to make sure it goes out on time, and especially that those areas get it as quickly as they can.
As Alan White said, the printed word would be one of the last things to stop, and I feel very privileged to be part of it.
125th. Oh, man, that's a long, long time, 123, but then...
We would like to continue to print it for the next 125 years.
Congratulations to every one of you, everybody that's worked in any way on record production and the producing of it. Everybody's worked together over the years, and to the current folk that are working with record, keep it going. We need to keep it going until Jesus comes, to keep the church members up to date with what each other are doing. And everybody that's gathered there today, happy 125 years. And just keep working together and keep it happening, and enjoy the day.
And enjoy keeping on reading record.
Next speaker is Bruce Manners. Bruce was scouted by a man named James Coffin, who had been commissioned to find potential writers during his time as an editor for the Record. He noticed Bruce was one of the most prolific writers of the Adventist Church and approached him to join the team. In 1988, Bruce started as an associate editor on a half-time basis, while still caring for a church. 2 years later, he went full-time and was appointed as editor when James Coffin returned to the United States. Bruce was the editor for the next 13 years. He resigned from his position in 2004 to return to pastoral ministry. But he still writes for the Record and signs, and I believe he's writing another book. So would you please put your hands together for Bruce Manners?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Is that working? Yes, it is. I can hear it. Yeah. It's good to be here. I'm here to talk about record editors, nice folks, editors. For this presentation, I've divided it into 4, let's see what happens. There we go. 4 areas, starting with the Hinson years, what's called the Hinson years, and I'm using that one as a guide because Anna Hinson was the first editor of Record, and she worked on Record as editor for 28 years. That's 28 years. Jared has another 20 years to go. That's what I'm saying. She, October in 1897, Anna Hingles was voted Union Secretary and the editor of Record. That lasted for exactly 6 months because she got married and went to Western Australia with her new husband. But she did come back. She was named as editor. I've lost my note here. She returned to take on the role again. And in the list, you'll notice I've put admin. I've put admin because so often in this era, the president, the secretary, or the treasurer, and sometimes all three, were listed as editors. And I suspect they really weren't editing. They may have given final approval. They may have said, look, we need to get something in. And that's kind of backed up where in 1924, the administrators are listed as editors: J.E. Fulton, W.G. Turner, F.A. Allen. And then Anna L. Hinson is listed as office editor. So I think we'll just go with admin when that appears. For most of its life, Record has been in a subscription magazine. You had to purchase it, and it started out as a subscription magazine. People had to pay for it. It had obituaries and weddings from the very earliest. Advertising began in 1901 when the storekeeper on the Avondale estate wanted to sell his house and his business. And a little further on, 1915, we discovered that it cost you 2 and 6, that's 2 shillings and 6pence, for 40 words or less. But if you wanted more, you could pay a penny per word. Sounds exciting. Hinson continued 1926 to 1933 when she died suddenly. She died suddenly, and she had developed a record that had kind of a letter from home quality about it. You could read it, and over time you begin to recognise names, and everyone was brother and sister unless you were pastor. So it had this old feel, I guess we would say today. Strong spiritual emphasis. Please pray for this. Keep in mind that this is happening. This camp meeting is coming. Tell your friends. All that kind of thing was happening. Long articles from officials within the church, some from the United States particularly, and that letter from home feel was just in it. Next period is a very short period, well, less editors. By the way, notice there was another female editor. I don't think there are anyone after Viola. Obviously, men are better editors. Sorry? Same process, editors having a little longer life in this period, but not many there. W.E. Batty, the associate editor, was the retired union president, and he was taking care of the record until they actually worked out what they were going to do with the record in this period. Then we get to what I call the maturing years, because this is when the record really found its what it was and how it was meant to proceed in this era. The Batty, by the way, this is when Robert Parr, who's probably well known by a few people here. Yes, okay, good. This was a period when the personality of the editors began to come through, and they were recognised as individuals. It just wasn't coming from a group of people. And for this information in this section, I'm dependent quite a lot on research I did probably 10 years ago now, where I actually talked to the various editors to get this information together. Robert H. Parr, former Adventist school teacher, he was a Sydney grammar school teacher as well. He became an editor working for Shakespeare's Head Company. Just try to say that quickly. Where they were looking after academic publications. And he told me that one day he wandered into the division office and he caught up with the editor at the time, Batty, and he offered to look after the record. The offer was accepted. As simple as that. I'm sure it went through committees. You know how the church works? I'm sure it went through committees. And he then became the editor down in Warburton for the first time. And he was quite proud to be able to say, printing it here, we get it printed more quickly and we get it out to you more quickly. And so that was one of his reasons for saying this is a good thing. At the time, Pa was listed as editor, the division secretary was listed as associate editor. That was later changed to the more realistic senior consulting editor. When Barry Oliver, a division secretary down here, when he became president, he kept the title, so it's since stayed with the division president. Pa reckoned there was not a lot of creativity or innovation coming from, quote, chaps in high places. So I just went on, he said, and went back into my shell and tried to brighten it up a bit. What he did, he brought his personality. And if you've ever met him, there's quite a touch of humour about him. At the back page, he called Flashpoint, little bits of news, and he would shine in that area. And he started the trend of having an editorial. And here also, he began to gain a following. And with his editorialship, numbers of subscribers went up quite well. July 1980 was a difficult year. This was the era of Desmond Ford, the Glacier View, and so on, in that period. And Pa and Ford were friends. And Pa told me, he said, because we were friends, I thought I was in trouble with my job. And he kind of said, quote, this is the end for me because I'm known as a friend of Ford and I'll get the axe. And he did. Whether that was the reason or not, I don't know. But it happened quickly. One more thing we should add there is that this was also the year the record was sent free. And that happened so quickly that Pa didn't realise it was happening. And the first free episode of Record went out to the churches before the churches knew it was coming, which was kind of interesting. And the next week, Pa had to write an editorial. Oh, by the way, you got that record last week, blah, 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 told the story. Division President K.S. Parmenter in September 8, 1980, explained the provision of a copy of the Australasian record for every home is one recent action taken to ensure that we have an informed membership in our churches. When I read that editorial, I read that Glacier View was one of the reasons why it came out. Now that's been debated, I think, by you. But when you read the editorial and the news about Glacier View back to back, go read it. You make up your own mind. Geoffrey Garn from South Africa replaced Pa. The theological crisis meant that unfortunately there were strong suspicions that he was here to fix up Australia, fix up the record for Australian readers. And rather sad, actually. Unfortunately, he wrote his first editorial entitled My Mandate. And he wrote, I have received a very clear mandate, and then quoted Ellen White, the publications that come forth from our presses today are to be of such a character as to strengthen every pin and pillar of the faith that was established by the Word of God and by the revelation of the Holy Spirit. Wow. He'd come to fix us up. There was even talk of the division president calling into South Africa on his way back from session over in the US and talking to him and telling him what they wanted here in Australia. The truth was, he had no idea he was the record editor. No idea. He and his wife were visiting with Pa and their wife, having a meal together. Bob Parr invited him up for a meal at Warburton, and just happened to mention he was the record editor as well. He goes, what? He thought he'd come to be Signs of the Times editor, because that's what he was in South Africa. So anyway, the theological crisis brought the tensions between what were commonly called the CBs, Concerned Brethren, and Fordites, and Barr used these, Gard used these descriptors when he talked about, and it was rather sad, and he really was not welcomed and misunderstood. And actually, when he died, I actually wrote an obituary and just told this story, saying he was not who a lot of people thought he was. Many pastors just would not talk to him. It was sad. It was sad. I couldn't accommodate everybody, so I simply decided I wasn't going to accommodate anybody. There you go. Gard continued the same style that had been set up. The next division session, James Coffin was appointed to replace him. This was an important. This is when Record changed. This is when Record matured and became the journalistic piece that it now is, because that's what he brought. Walter Scragg, the division president, an experienced communicator in his own way. He had worked with radio and television, understood communication. He and the other senior officials wanted Record to move on from the theological issues, to get to the real stuff, real life stuff, because this was just dividing the church. Coffin was in his mid-30s at his appointment, one of the youngest records of editor, and he was instructed, make the Record contemporary, enliven it in a, quote, deliberate attempt to move down a generation. And he was given freedom, imagine this, he was given freedom to include letters that were against what was in the Record. Oh. Scragg said this to me. We tried to make Record more representative of the whole church, not just administration. The idea was that we should convey the idea that the Record is owned by the whole church and you have your right to be heard, even though it wasn't something which the editor or the church leadership agreed with. That's a grown-up approach. He had worked with Adventist Review. He was the news editor, born in the United States. He'd studied at Avondale College, had been associate pastor at the church on the corner of Avondale College from 78 to 81. And that was during this crisis, so he understood the tensions that was there. And Coffin negotiated that it should be a journalistically sound newspaper, spending more time on editing and rewriting if necessary. Quote, my goal was to support the 27 fundamentals of the church, but at the same time allow people a significant amount of latitude to express views and opinions and try to use this as a sort of catharsis to help bring hearing. He received vindictive, hateful letters. This is Jim Coffin. And he came under fire from administrators, particularly about the letters page, but also because they'd lost access in the way they were used to. There was a push to bring the editor back to the division, to bring him under control. But this changed, and over time there was this sense of tension going down. And he said he sensed a change of tone, a general respect. And Coffin resigned in 1991, but he had changed, matured, I like to think, the magazine. He made it easy for someone to take on the role because of what he'd set up. One of his jobs was to find editors, as has been mentioned. I remember going to ministers' meetings in Victoria. It was lunchtime, I saw him sitting across the way and I went over and introduced myself. And it was funny, the reaction. He immediately stood up, hand out, "You're Bruce Manners, you write more than anybody else in the whole division." Oh, okay. And probably a year later, I began working with him as one of the editors they were searching for. Gary Krause, as mentioned a little while ago, he was the other one, and I did beat him at table tennis. That's important. Nathan Brown was the next one, the youngest editor, appointed in this era, and first to hold the position without ordination. Bob Parr wasn't ordained when he started, but was ordained in his time as Record. Let me embarrass the man a little. He came well qualified, continuing student, working on a PhD in English, teaching undergraduate English, had degrees in law and literature, and was freelance writing at the moment when he was asked to come on board. Won a writing competition with Adventist Review in 1998. Went across and worked with Adventist Review, came down to a publishing company, did an internship with us. Bill Johnson's named him the best English language writer in the Adventist Church. Enough embarrassment yet? Oh, okay. When the Record came to the media centre here, he was offered the role here, but made the point that what was planned at the moment gave the editorial role a bit of a diminished role. I think that was true. I don't know a lot about it. I think that was true, but because that changed after the first editor left there. Continues as book editor, Science Publishing, and actually has made the publishing house as a book publisher well known throughout the English-speaking world of Adventism. Then we go to the media centre. Don't know much about these years, but let me say Pablo Lillo came on. The first issue that he was the editor of came out in black and white. I didn't know that till I checked. And he was editor. The next issue they discovered colour. And he was then called head of news and editorial. You'd have to ask them what they meant by that, but I think it was trying to use some of the record material in other ways to spread the value of it around. James Standish, an Australian-American, was communication director of the division, and he stood in for a while as an interim editor. And when they couldn't find an editor, he became what he called in his first editorial as editor, the accidental editor. He came to Australia to write a book, but he ended up working for the church, which stopped him writing a book. He did write 3 chapters, he confesses. And then Jared Stackleroth, what can we say? He's the editor. Each of them benefited from the Jim Coffin years. Let me just say that. Journalistically sound magazine. Big difference now is we're in the digital age, and they're now taking the Record out into the digital age, because guess what? In the digital realm, you don't have the edge of the page, which stops you from putting more words in. And so while we get the Record at a certain time, you'll find that news goes out before we get it in the paper Record. There's more photos, longer quotes, and they're experimenting as they go, I'm sure. And Jared reminded me that print still has a valuable place in church because it's part of the culture. But I suspect that culture will change over time. Look, the focus today for me has been on editors. Let me say a huge thank you to those people who assist editors, because they're the people that really make the editors look good, let me tell you. They're the ones that do a lot of work. Without them, their work, their input, their dedication, their creativity, the magazine would have been poorer. So anyone here who is not editor but working on Record, thank you.
And thank you, Bruce. But don't go too far, because you're needed on a panel with me. I'm Brenton Stacey, and I worked with Bruce. I made him look good. No, he gave me a good break, for which I'm forever thankful. So Bruce, come and join me on the panel. And with Bruce, we have other former editors and a current editor. Nathan Brown will be joining us as well, and Jared Stackeroff. And you'll notice one thing already. We're an all-male panel. That's a problem. So I've got a question for you, Bruce. This is representative of the last 3/4 of Adventist Record's history, but not the first. And as we know, Anna Hinson is our longest-serving editor. I was going to ask you about what that said about the church and the role of the magazine at the time, but I'm going to ask you a different question now, because I think we've answered that. What did other editorial staff like Karen Miller bring to Adventist Record that you did not?
Are you saying a female?
I am.
Yeah. Yeah. Karen Miller. Did you work with her too?
I did.
Yeah. Very strong individual, very creative individual, and very much alert to, I'm not going to call it feminism, but women's issues. And I think that helped Record. She was a blessing to have on the team. And you're okay too.
Thank you. Creating a sense of closeness, that, and I disagree with some others a little bit, I think that was the role of the magazine. I think that's what the church at the time actually said its mission was. And I guess that's like being a pastor. It's a pastoral role to bring a sense of closeness. So a question for you, Jared. When have you been reminded of your role, not as an editor, but as a pastor?
Good question. Someone said to me something, and it stuck with me through my whole career. They said, at a decent-sized Adventist church, you'll get 60 people to show up on a Sabbath. But at Record, if you write an editorial, if you put your thoughts, your heart, your words down on paper, you might get 60,000 people reading it. You know, we don't print that many copies, but many are shared throughout homes. Through the Pacific, they get read by multiple families. And that, I guess that stuck with me just as a sense of there's a great responsibility working on the Record to care for the church, to care for the members, to care for your words as you use them, to make sure that you're including the diversity that our church has. Dr. Barry used to emphasize this. Glenn also emphasizes the importance of our Pacific church members. Given it's 80% odd of our division, we can't forget them. They're the core almost of what is happening in this part of the world. And so making sure that, for me, I'm thinking, okay, how's this going to play to a diverse range of people? How can it's not about what I think, it's about how we build up the church, how we treat everyone as we would like to be treated, and find a way to communicate important things in a way that is accessible, is swallowable, and in a way that's, helping the readers themselves. It's not about pushing our own agenda, that sort of thing.
Bruce, did you get a sense of that as you were also on the preaching circuit at the time? And I imagine you were seen sort of as the person people could come to if they had an issue with something the church had done, or their perception of something the church had done. Did you get a sense of that feeling as you preached and travelled as Record editor?
I think the preaching, the travelling kind of thing was important because people could approach you with that, why did you do that? Or shouldn't you have done this? And I think most people understand or understood as you talk to them that, well, we can't cover everything. And sometimes you just say, I'm sorry, didn't think of it that way, or whatever. Thanks for letting me know. And most people kind of accept that, and therefore they go to the record, hopefully with different eyes, saying, they're human too. I think that was the important thing about going to churches, just to say, hey, I'm like you. I just have a different job to what you've got.
Nathan, if your role is as much pastoral as editorial, how does an editor bring their readers an understanding of present truth, particularly when you're talking about issues that we may disagree with?
Yeah, I think certainly part of the role as record should be to lead, and to lead in informed and thoughtful responses to issues in the church and to the world around us. I think that's something that needs to be done with consultation and with care and thoughtfulness and all those things. But there is also a place for an editorial line, and that's where part of my discomfort to an extent with the church, with the editorial being more embedded in the Wahroonga ecosystem, is that there's less of a space for that, because there's more of a perception and possibly more of a reality that record is a mouthpiece for the church. Now, in the glory days of Warburton, there was always plausible deniability from a church leader, because it wasn't Barry's job to check record week by week. And I actually think that's a stronger position for a church leader to be in. And it also means that the editor can take more responsibility for responsibly, and I intentionally use that word many times, engaging in topics that might be a step removed from church leadership, because I think at their best they're two distinct roles. And I think that that's something that has been a great part of Adventist tradition, but I think it's something that perhaps we need to rediscover a little bit.
Jared, do you feel you have control?
Yes. Look, it's comforting to me that there is the consultative process. I feel slightly protected in that there is Tracy and Glenn and others who looking at the record and give that different perspective. If I have questions, I can go to our theologians, our church leaders, and they can, I guess, check with a different perspective. Glenn's not emailing me every week to say, put this in, don't put that in, what are we doing? I like to see it as a conversation. And it is, I've worked in Warburton. I sense that perspective is positive. As someone who studied journalism and has that sort of background, I'm all for freedom of the press. I think record needs to find that line between representing the church well and appearing to have an open conversation. If everyone thinks that it's just very tightly controlled propaganda, it loses credibility and respect. It doesn't have an impact to change lives as we hope it would. In the same line, if you get a maverick editor come along, you can have things go very badly very quickly if there's no sort of consultation. So I think we are in the process, in the system that we're in, we make the most of that, and it is something we think about. When I was appointed editor, you always think you're ready for a job until you get the job, and then you think, oh heck, help me out here, Lord. I used to pray, Jesus, give me humility and give me wisdom, every day, because it's not about me, but I need your wisdom to help navigate some of these issues, because there are issues, things that I don't think are very severe or important or big issues. For some people, they've spent years studying these particular, nuances of our faith or our theology, and it becomes a really big thing for them. So,
well, let me ask Bruce this question then, carrying on from this. Did you ever make a decision and publish something that you didn't consult about and that came back to bite?
No. Look, nothing comes to mind. Well, the only thing that does come to mind is that I had done an interview with someone who'd written a book in the States, and just as a precaution, I think I'd sent a copy of it to Barry, who was my go-to person. Then all of a sudden I had the division president on the line, asking, who told you to do this and whatever. And that was kind of, what have I done wrong? And it was just a misunderstanding, but obviously that was an issue that I was not aware of. So that's the only thing that comes to mind when you ask that question, that there was that one incident, and quickly sorted out, except I had a hole in the page that I needed to fill in.
I remember Bruce once leaving a hole on the editorial page. Do you remember that? He wrote a 3 or 4 word editorial, which he backed up the following issue with an editorial that described why he only used 3 or 4 words. I can't remember what they were after all this time. I should go back and read.
No idea.
Nathan, question for you. Editors as advocates. So similar to the question we raised before, there's a precedent, lots of examples in mainstream media of editors serving as advocates and winning awards for doing so. Should editors ever serve as advocates for anybody but their readers?
Yeah, I mean, that's very much the job of an editor, is to have great sympathy for their long-suffering readers, and to be people that make the reader's reading life as best they possibly can. So that's a pretty significant thing. But so there's multiple ways of even understanding what you're talking about as advocates. I mean, one of the things I think was kind of touched upon earlier was the idea of people getting in touch with an editor and saying, I have this problem with the church. And that's something that I really struggled with as an editor, because I got some horrendous stories and I had no power and no capacity to do anything with them. And that's, it's partly a reflection of people that are in the church who are hurt, people who are hurt by the church, or people that, for whatever reason have that wound, that baggage, whatever it might be. And really, as an editor, you can listen, and there's not much more you can do beyond that. And, occasionally when there are opportunities, you would refer them to, somebody who might be able to help them. But really, there's very little for that kind of thing in a public sense. And then, I think there is a place for, again, and this gets back a little bit to the idea of an editorial line, of editors actually having an opinion. And again, this kind of gets back to my point where there should be a distinction between an editorial opinion and a church position. And there is at times, but it gets blurry. And I think that's one of the difficulties of anyone being an editor employed by a church. That's always going to be a blurry kind of thing. And pure journalist, I'm not sure there is any, and if they do, they don't get paid, because if you're getting paid by somebody, then they're the people that pick the line. And so I'm talking about in the generic journalistic kind of sense, not just in the church sense. So, I think there are opportunities, but it's within reasonable boundaries, as it should be.
So, Jared, being a little closer, how have you managed that tension between knowing a lot about an issue and then only being able to tell your readers some of that issue? How have you negotiated that tension?
Well, sometimes I'm always the last to find out, Brenton. I think there is a responsibility. There's a lot of big issues in the world at the moment that the church is wrestling with, and it's hard. One of my ideas or philosophies of doing some of this stuff is to do no harm. There's been some conversations about women's ordination. There's been some conversations about LGBTQ stuff. And my opinion doesn't matter necessarily as much as am I allowing opinions going in that are going to really hurt some people in our pews, in our churches. And that's a difficult thing. We did, when the San Antonio vote was about to happen, we had some yes articles and some no articles. What's that like? You know,
Sounds
each
familiar.
person's opinion. And that was before I was editor. And I think there is a place for Record to share both sides, but sometimes the arguments I get from a certain side of a question or a conversation aren't necessarily as well articulated, or they're much more aggressive, or they have the ability to do harm. You know, when we go back to looking at women in ministry, whether that's a yes or a no for any particular individual, you know, that question changed for me throughout my life. My understanding of and my stance, my theology on that has changed throughout my life. And that's not a bad thing, but then who am I to go and put that on someone else? So my care, I'm being very candid, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. My careful consideration of that is to, if I put in a letter or I put in an article, if I put in something that starts a conversation, there may be backlash. Can we manage that effectively? Can we do that? Or is that going to cause hurt for people in our community, in our pews? And God forbid someone were to leave the church or to leave God because they thought that that opinion or that letter or that particular forceful point of view was the only option that they had in understanding things like that. So yeah, there's care that must be taken in that space.
I think we need to realise when we're an editor, we're working for a cause that's bigger than me. And so for us working for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and obviously you need to be careful that you stay within certain boundaries, and you need to understand what those boundaries are. I may have personal opinions that I would like to express, but those personal opinions may take some people outside those boundaries if I were to express them. I think that made sense.
Confess to us,
yes. My confession is.
All right, a couple more questions, and then we'll close. Nathan, when did you find your calling as an editor? When you published a piece that changed someone's mind? When you published a piece that changed church policy or influenced church policy, or when you earned a rebuke from your consulting editor? I'm not saying any of those are true, but I guess what I'm asking is, you know, when does an editor feel like a real editor?
Well, I did write an editorial at one stage called Angry Letters Are Good, and I still stand by that, because that's what it should be. Now, I think that's a distinction between angry reactions on social media, because that's nonsense and not worth the pixels it's printed on. But people that actually take the time to sit down and write an angry letter that is thoughtful, that's 200 words long, and that you can publish is a beautiful thing. And it also is a big step beyond those people who will just try and have a snip in the background. There was one thing I resented, and I think we actually changed policy at one stage while I was record editor, was that the appropriate way to respond to an issue in the record is to write something for the record.
conference presidents are great at having a bit of a swing in the back door. I mean, in a back corridor somewhere. But to actually have the courage to say, well, I said what I said in public, make a counter-argument.
And put my name to it.
And put your name to it and have the courage to engage in the discussion. So I think that that's the best thing that an editor can get is an angry letter, because they've taken seriously what you've published, they've taken the time to think about it and respond, and the conversation then can move forward. And I think that we need more of that.
Bruce?
You're asking him?
Yes.
You have a question? Or sorry.
That's the way I phrased it. Bruce? Your calling as an editor was when? When did you sort of realise that, I've done something?
As an editor? Well,
I think you told me once, though, that you actually wrote something that did change someone's mind. Do you remember what it was?
I'm getting older. Let me go another way, because nothing comes to mind in that, but that's not unusual for me. I like to think, when I look back on my life as an editor, I really enjoyed what I was doing, because, one, I enjoyed the challenge of trying to make sense of some of the letters that came in. By the way, Bob Parr had left his nut file in one of the drawers.
You are all being very candid this afternoon.
And it had the names of all the presidents. No, it didn't. So, when you reflect on stuff like that, and you all get the stupid letters that come in, and you kind of chuckle and laugh and throw it in the bin and then tell your spouse. But to me, the job was a delight in the sense that you're actually trying to make the church better. And you had a tool to do it with, and to me that was the real joy. And I would think, this is not going to help 98% of my readers, but 2% will read this, and I think that will help them. Therefore, I'm going to put that in. And Barry was a pretty good, person to work with.
Final question for you all, and you can all contribute to this. There's always another editor that comes after you. What advice would you give to a future editor of record? Jared? Particularly in an era where less people are reading and where Christianity continues to decline.
I hope future editors go further and better than I ever have. That's my one challenge we have in the church, is finding people to work in editorial sort of roles in communications. With Avondale shutting down its program, whenever we get a job opening, it's very hard to find someone. So my hope is that the next people coming through, the next generation, they can do more on more platforms in better spaces than I ever can. I guess my advice would be to just trust God and put Him, it sounds like a cliche, but the reality is He's led me in my life, I believe, and I got to work with Nathan, I got to work with Bruce, with Pablo, with James. I've been under a lot of these guys, and I've learnt something different from each and every one of them. And that has helped me be the best editor I can be. So my hope for the next generation of editors is to be teachable, to learn, and to follow where God leads them, to be true to that.
Nathan?
Firstly, it's a privilege. It really, and I guess Bruce made mention of this as a complete youngster. To have that kind of privilege was an amazing kind of opportunity. And even when you write something that might be considered problematic and you get all those responses, that shows that people do notice, people do take it seriously. And so even that is a blessing of its own kind. And I think with that privilege comes responsibility. And, I've, now having been some years not record editor, I've reflected on and said, maybe I should have gone harder while I was there and, pushed some things a bit more. But of course you don't when you're there, because that's the responsibility that you have. And when you're not record editor, then you can write things and it's up to the record editor whether they decide to print them or not.
These guys are a lot spicier since they left, so it's my problem to deal with.
And that's actually a good thing, because you can push some of that, we need to speak more on this or whatever, and it is part of the process that you have an editor that then is in that position of responsibility to decide how the church might engage in it in that bigger sense. So I appreciate working with Jared in that kind of way when I write something and he'll say, well, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, that's good.
Final word? Howard Record. Was it final word? What's the finally? Finally, brethren, Bruce.
Well, now I have to be profound.
Why start now?
Yeah. Thank you. Look, I think, being an editor for me was one of the best jobs I had. For someone else to come and take it, my advice would be find the bits you enjoy, because there'll be bits you don't enjoy. And make sure you really enjoy the bits you do enjoy, because there's hard work involved in all of it. It does take time. And I think the best thing I can say is have a heart for people. Try to understand who you're writing to, and the person who writes the letter, what are they writing about, and is this helping someone else, and so on. Just have a heart for people, I think, is a core thing that's not often recognised.
Would you please thank our panellists?
Well, we've come to the end of today's proceedings officially. But my wife is Samoan, and at the end of proceedings, there is always a word of thanks. It's important to give gratitude. So I just want to say thank you for coming and joining us in this celebration today. I want to say thank you for Wahroonga Church, Pastor David. Thank you for your hospitality, giving us the church service, essentially, and the day, the lunch, the hospitality team, the AV team, and the guys up the back, the whole, the young people that were singing for us in the church service. All of those were Wahroonga members, and you guys have blessed us immensely. So thank you, and we really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to those who you haven't heard from today, who are former staff members, family of staff members. Bob Parr's daughters I met earlier who are here. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and joining us and being part of this special celebration today. There's our church leaders, past and present, who have supported us, the South Pacific Division. I don't know if you guys realize, but in the world, record is a fairly unique thing. I don't know if there's any other division that has such a division-wide magazine. I know Adventist Review goes out, but that's subscription. It's a limited opportunity for people to receive. And many unions have publications, but no one quite has what we have. So we're very blessed. And that is through the generosity and the foresight of our South Pacific Division. So I really appreciate the division and their possibility of making record make it to 125 years. It's only because of our church administration in this part of the world that allows that to happen. My team at Adventist Record and at Adventist Media more broadly have worked hard to pull this event together. You've seen some of them up the front, some of them you haven't seen up the front today, but They contributed with desserts, ordering the cake, and doing some of the decorations. Some of the girls who put together the decorations aren't able to be here today, but have really added to the atmosphere and the beautiful event that we've experienced. I know I'm going to forget some people, so I'm not picking out names specifically. I'm just doing broad categories of people. But we're very grateful to be given this responsibility to work on Adventist Record, and we thank the church for that opportunity. Science Publishing. Andrew, thank you for joining us, and Nathan for coming up from Warburton. I still have very fond memories of my time at Warburton, starting out just fresh from college, learning the ropes of record, and have tried to be true to that and keep some of those things that I learned at those days going through the record. There's that continuity there. And we saw that beautiful presentation from Ray Portbury and some of the folk at Signs. Without them putting together record, we saw the bit of the process, the chaos that Scott created. It's fairly chaotic. Every 2 weeks we've got a deadline and everything has to happen. And then we do it all over again. It just keeps going round and round and round. So thank you to Science Publishing for getting the record printed and distributed. We've had postage issues in the past few years. We've had COVID. We've had all sorts of things that have made it hard, but we've still got the record out and it's still mostly been on time. So thank you to Signs and everyone who makes it possible. I'm almost in the most blessed role in the church in some ways. It's just a real privilege. So thank you for allowing me to have this role, and thank you for supporting today's event. Before we leave, let's say a word of prayer, and let's thank God who makes it all possible for us to be here. Father in heaven, we want to thank you for the opportunity to celebrate today. Lord, not everything has to be dour and serious. Today's been a joyful celebration, and we've remembered what you have done, both through the record, through the South Pacific Division. We've heard some of the history, we've seen some of the stories, and Lord, you've been working behind the scenes, and we need to take this time to acknowledge you. Lord, as people travel back to their homes, some have come from some distance away, may you give them traveling mercies, and may you continue to bless everyone who contributed to today's program. Wahroonga Church, may you continue to bless the members here and fill their pantries up, all the generous food and things that they offered us today. May you just replenish them and fill them up. Lord, as we go from this place, may we continue to read, to engage, to believe, to wrestle with our faith, and to continue to live out our faith in the best way we can in everyday life. May we share the stories of what you've done for us in our lives as we go out and about this week. And may this highlight day, this high day for us, be something that just continues in a long line of you working through your church to share stories about what you're doing around the South Pacific. And Lord, may we see you soon. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone. We have to put some of this away because there's another event this evening. But yeah, feel free to say g'day to anyone you need to and head on out, and we will see you all next time. Oh, that's right. I'm remembered by my good staff who I would be lost without.